Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In this podcast, we take you on a journey through more than 2 centuries of sacred history, the story of Christ Church Cathedral, the spiritual heart and architectural crown of Newcastle. From its convict-era origins in 1816 to its stunning Gothic Revival architecture and deep cultural connections to war, education and civic life, this is more than a building. It is a living symbol of resilience, remembrance and faith. Join Society member Ian Eckford as he uncovers the layers of history, the visionaries and architects, the triumphs and trials, and the stories held in the hallowed halls of Christ Church Cathedral in Newcastle.
In this podcast, I'll present a short history of Newcastle's Anglican Cathedral, or to use its correct title, the Cathedral Church of Christ the King. I'll cover the years 1816 to 2025, nearly 210 years of Newcastle's history. The presentation will include aspects of the architectural design of the building, the symbolism incorporated, and special items held there. The term cathedral is the title of a church that is the seat of a bishop in a diocese, and it's managed by a cathedral dean who also serves as priest to the cathedral parish. Since the creation of the Diocese of Newcastle in 1848 and up until 2025, there have been 14 bishops in the diocese and 16 cathedral deans. The cathedral serves both the diocese and the Newcastle parish for religious purposes, and also functions as a focal point for the broader community. It celebrates the Eucharist, traditional Christian events such as Christmas and Easter, as well as marriages, baptisms and funerals. The cathedral also commemorates other events including Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, and provides services for Law Week, for the police, conducts choir presentations, missions to seamen and musical and opera performances. It also serves as a chapel for Newcastle Grammar School. Christ Church Cathedral is a landmark building in the city and highly significant with heritage and cultural importance. In 2011, it was added to the New South Wales State Heritage List. It's the largest Anglican cathedral in New South Wales and the third largest in Australia after St Paul's in Melbourne and St John's in Brisbane. The cathedral is an excellent example of Gothic Revival architecture in Australia and in the 19th century. Although there may have been a small church on the site in 1812, the cathedral site was firmly established in 1816 when Captain James Wallace became the Commandant of Newcastle. He was instructed by Governor Lachlan Macquarie to build several public buildings, including a church. Wallace engaged 2 convicts to work on it, James Clohessy, a stonemason, and Joseph Lycett, an artisan forger. Lycett drew up the plans to the direction of Clohessy, who was experienced in building. The new church had a 30-metre high tower and spire, timber shingle roof, walls of stone and brick, rendered and painted white as most government buildings were required to be. The church could accommodate 400 people and was almost completed by the end of 1817. In August 1818, Governor Macquarie visited Newcastle for the official opening of the church, named Christ Church on Wallace's recommendation. All military personnel and convicts in the settlement were required to attend the ceremony and were issued with an extra ration of meat as an incentive. The colonial chaplain, William Cowper, conducted a service and the marriage of 10 couples, including Clohessy and Maria Wilson, and Cowper baptised 30 children. 5 of them were my own ancestors. Unfortunately, Wallace had made changes to Clohessy's design by making the building wider, which increased the span for the roof structure. The walls were not strengthened and foundations under the walls were not increased in size. The brick and stone church became rather wobbly, and within 3 years of construction the walls were crumbling, the roof shingles were falling off, and the tower and spire had to be demolished. In 1848, William Tyrrell, a parish priest in England, was appointed Bishop of Newcastle. This made Christ Church a cathedral, and the township became a city. By 1866, the old church, now a cathedral, was in very poor condition. The government architect, Mortimer Lewis, inspected and reported on the building, stating that it was becoming unsafe, it should be demolished, and a new cathedral built. At this time, several new cathedrals were being planned or built in Australia, including St Andrew's Anglican in Sydney, St Paul's Anglican in Melbourne, St Patrick's Catholic also in Melbourne, and St Mary's Catholic in Sydney. They were strongly Gothic Revival designs and built of stone, with the traditional features of towers, spires, flying buttresses and stained glass windows. In March 1868, Queen Victoria's son Prince Alfred visited Newcastle and was given a carriage tour around the growing city. Coincidentally, 3 months later, in early June 1868, it was decided by the Church Committee and with Bishop Tyrrell's approval to proceed with a new cathedral for Newcastle to replace the old. A brief was put together for a design competition, and later that month it was advertised in newspapers in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. The brief requirements included a budget not to exceed £10,000, about $2.6 million in 2025, exclusive of a tower or detailed ornamentation. It was to seat 1,000 and be built of brick or stone. The prize money was £75, about $20,000 in today's currency. 14 entries were received in December 1868, with the winners being Melbourne architects Leonard Terry and Robert Speechley. They declined to proceed further, so the Cathedral Building Committee decided to engage one of the other entrants, Sydney architect John Horbury Hunt, to execute Terry and Speechley's design. Hunt's own design entry had been quite an ambitious one, very French Gothic in style. It was to have a nave suitable to accommodate 1,500 people, a large central tower, and to include a chapter house. Had his design been built, it would have been nearly 1.5 times the size of the existing cathedral. His design was estimated to cost £50,000, now about $13 million. John Horbury Hunt was born in Canada in 1838 and trained with Edward Clark Cabot, a prominent Boston architect and civil engineer. Horbury Hunt's father was a successful builder in that city, and the young trainee architect learned his craft well. His father taught him carpentry, joinery, bricklaying and blacksmithing, and Cabot taught him design and engineering. Hunt came to New South Wales in 1862 and took up a position with architect Edmund Blackett, who had about 3/4 of all the architectural work in New South Wales. Blackett quickly recognised Hunt's skills and put him in charge of all site works for the projects in his office, including St Andrew's Cathedral, Sydney. However, following Hunt's engagement, Newcastle's cathedral project was put on hold due to lack of funds. In the meantime, Hunt was engaged by Bishop Francis Turner to design new cathedrals for his diocese at Grafton and Armidale. Much smaller in scale and modest in design, they were built in detailed brickwork. In 1873, Hunt was asked to provide a completely new design for Newcastle Cathedral that would be affordable and easy to build using local skilled trades and materials. His design was an English Gothic cathedral style, much simpler than his first scheme, but well detailed. He specified that it be built with double-pressed and double-glazed bricks, as he knew sandstone would not survive the environment so close to the ocean. The design work and meetings between the architect and building committee progressed throughout the 1870s. Unfortunately, in early 1879, Bishop Tyrrell became ill, and a few days after surgery he passed away. He was succeeded by Bishop Josiah Pearson, who signed off on the new design in 1882. Work started on site in early 1883 for the cost of £20,000, now about $5.5 million. This, incidentally, was the same year that work commenced on architect Antoni Gaudi's Cathedral of the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Work stopped in Newcastle due to a dispute between Hunt and the cathedral canon Arthur Selwyn over the demolition of the old church. The building committee realised that it would take some time to complete the cathedral, so it looked for a short-term solution. Hunt was asked to provide a simple design for a pro-cathedral which could be used as a hall when the new cathedral was completed. The pro-cathedral was built in 1884 and is now part of Newcastle Grammar School and known as Horbury Hunt Hall. By 1889, the cathedral project was again revived and Hunt slightly modified his design with a taller 8-sided spire instead of the short 4-sided spire. In 1891, the new bishop, George Stanton, approved the recommencement of the cathedral project, and work started in 1892 with John Straub as the builder. Straub had previously worked in Newcastle, having built the Victoria Theatre in Perkins Street, completed in 1891, and the Earp Gillum Warehouse in Newcastle East in 1888. The cathedral foundation stone was laid on the 2nd of June 1892, and then another dispute broke out between Hunt and Straub on one side and Dean Selwyn on the other. The builder was locked out of the site, and in 1893 all work ceased. The matter went to the Equity Court in Sydney, which found in favour of Hunt and the builder. However, the building committee decided to end Hunt's engagement, and he was dismissed from the project in August 1896. The builder did not wish to continue with the building, so work ceased. Since Hunt's departure, there have been several architects involved in the completion of the cathedral works, and largely to Hunt's original design. The principal architects were John Hingston Buckridge, Frederick George Castleton, Edwin Clary Sara and John Sara. In 1901, Buckridge had a temporary roof installed over the nave and part of the central crossing so that services could finally be conducted in the cathedral. Between 1909 and 1910, Castleton added the vestries and Tyrrell Chapel at the east end and a temporary roof over the chancel and vestries. In 1912, Castleton completed the chancel, and between 1922 and 1925, Castleton added the St Michael Chapel, also known as the Warriors Chapel. In 1926, Castleton completed construction of the nave, the west end of the cathedral, and the base to the tower. The last stage of the cathedral, the transepts and tower, were added in 1975 to 1979, initially under the direction of Bishop Ian Sheville and later from Bishop Alfred Holland and Dean Robert Beale. These works were designed and managed by Newcastle architects Castleton and Sara. To pay for these additions to the cathedral, a successful fundraising campaign was run, led by Newcastle businessman John Peshar. The cathedral structure is built entirely out of load-bearing brickwork, more than 1.2 metres thick at the base and tapering to approximately 400 millimetres at the parapet roof level. The walls are 18 metres high to the top of the parapets, and although there was no supporting subframe of steelwork, they were braced by flying buttresses. The design layout for this cathedral is a very traditional one, based on the Gothic cathedrals built in England and Europe between the 12th and 16th centuries. It's in the form of a Latin cross, symbolic of the crucifixion of Jesus. The building is almost perfectly aligned on an east-west axis from the entry to the altar, with the transepts north-south. The layout includes an entry porch, narthex, baptistry, nave, crossing, transepts, chapels, chancel, sanctuary and vestries. The southwest porch is the usual entry point in English churches and cathedrals. Apart from providing shelter, traditionally it was for couples to reaffirm their consent to their pending marriage. The entry porch then leads to the narthex at the west end. This is a large space that provides an area for gathering prior to the commencement of services. In medieval times, it was as far as women were allowed to enter. The great western doors at the rear of the cathedral are open for the arrival and departure of weddings and funerals, and especially for religious purposes, including the ordination of bishops. Baptistry and font in the northwest corner adjoin the narthex. These were traditionally located at the rear of a church or cathedral, close to the entry. This is symbolic of the start of a new life and the beginning of the journey towards God in the east. Baptism is symbolic of Christ rising and represents the cleansing of a person. The nave is the body of the cathedral where the congregation sits. The word nave comes from the Latin word navis, meaning ship. The ceiling of the nave is like an inverted ship's hull and is made of cedar, a material symbolic of eternity, immortality, strength, peace and healing. The quatrefoils on the ceiling that look like a four-leaf clover symbolise the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, spreading the word of God to the four corners of the earth. The 16 stained glass windows to the aisles depict various saints, whereas the clerestory windows are simply coloured glass. The 12 banners displayed on brick pillars to the nave are the work of Newcastle artist Ray Richards. They depict saints and archangels on one side of the banner, with symbols on the reverse side illustrating the conflict between good and evil. The central area of the cathedral is known as the crossing. It marks the intersection between the nave, transepts and chancel. The nave altar is located here to be close to the congregation and is positioned on a mobile platform which can be raised or lowered. The pulpit in the crossing is for the delivery of sermons and is traditionally located against the pier in the northeast of the crossing facing the nave. It was designed by Newcastle architect Frederick Menkins and used to be in the 1884 Pro-Cathedral. It's 8-sided and carved from cedar. At the end of the nave where it meets the crossing, there's a glass panel over a recess in the floor. In this recess is the original foundation stone laid on the 1st of January 1817 for the church built by Captain Wallace more than 200 years ago. The inscription on the stone states, "Erected AD 1817, Lachlan Macquarie Esquire, Governor, James Wallace Esquire, Captain, 46th Regiment." The stone was discovered during earthquake repairs in 1995 to 1997 and placed in the recess newly constructed during restoration. On the pier to the right of the nave is a replica of the Canterbury Cross, located in almost the same position as the one in Canterbury Cathedral, England. It symbolises the Christian faith and its design is based on a bronze Saxon brooch from AD 850 found under a street in Canterbury. It was also known as a Becket cross after St Thomas a Becket, who was murdered in that cathedral in 1170. It's one of only 12 sent to Anglican cathedrals around the world in 1935. The north transept includes the St Nicholas Chapel, patron saint of sailors and dedicated to seafarers, reflecting Newcastle's harbour history. The altar to the chapel is made of Australian rosewood with floral symbols depicting waratahs, palms and wildflowers. Waratahs are symbolic of courage and resilience, palms symbolic of Jesus' victory over death, and wildflowers symbolic of happiness. The cathedral organ, originally installed in 1906, is positioned above and behind the north transept altar and is linked to the choir loft and keyboard on the opposite side of the building. It's been updated several times since. The south transept contains the St Christopher Chapel, with St Christopher being the patron saint of travellers and children. It's also known as the Children's Chapel. It was dedicated to the 6th Bishop, George Long, who died of a stroke in London at the Lambeth Conference in 1930. The reredos, the screen behind the altar, depicts 2 scenes from the life of St Christopher. The altar is a carpenter's bench and can be interpreted as a reminder that Jesus was a carpenter. East of the crossing is the chancel, which contains the sanctuary and cathedra, the traditional seat of the bishop. It also includes the choir stalls and the stalls for the cathedral canons. The chancel is elevated above the crossing and nave by 3 steps, behind an arch and a carved stone railing. The sanctuary is located at the east end of the cathedral and is a sacred place. It incorporates the high altar and is elevated above the chancel by another 2 steps and a railing. The high altar is raised a further 3 steps above the sanctuary floor. The high altar is symbolically the central feature of the cathedral and is also a reference to the Last Supper, with wine representing the blood of Christ and the host symbolic of his body. The altar is made of Australian rosewood from Cooranbong. The 5 panels on the front of the altar show angels and the Paschal Lamb representing Jesus. Located on the high altar, there are 6 bronze candlesticks, symbolic of the eternal light and of the 6 days of creation. Made in 1570, they came from a monastery near Milan, Italy. They were gifted to the cathedral in the early 1920s in honour of the 15 Horace Crotty, who served in the Australian Army in World War I. Candlesticks are the oldest items in the cathedral. The alabaster reredos, the screen behind the high altar, is in 3 sections. The centrepiece depicts the Last Supper with Jesus and the Apostles, and there's a set of 3 statues on each side. This is a replica of the reredos in the parish church in Whippingham on the Isle of Wight, England. The sanctuary lamp is a memorial to Dean John Blow, the 9th Dean, who was killed in a plane crash in Western Australia in June 1950, a year after becoming Dean. The Bishop of Riverina also died in the same crash. The 5 stained glass lancet windows in the east wall can be seen to symbolise the 5 wounds of Christ, a nail through each hand and through each foot, a spear to his side. Each window contains symbolic illustrations. The St Michael Chapel, also known as the Warriors' Chapel, displays many religious and military features. Symbolically, St Michael was the archangel and leader warrior of God's armies who defeated Satan during the war in heaven. The chapel is located in the northeast corner where the chapter house would typically be located. Approximately 330,000 Australians served in World War I, with 60,000 killed, and many were buried in unknown or unmarked graves or places. The St Michael Chapel is a memorial to those who fell in World War I. It was designed by Newcastle architect Frederick Castleton and built between 1922 and 1925. It was intended to provide a place for families and friends of the deceased to remember and mourn. It was completed before the war memorials were constructed in Sydney and Canberra. The St Michael Chapel is used for the Eucharist, for meditation, small services and weddings, baptisms and funerals. The chapel was not in Hunt's original plan in 1873, but was added by Dean Horace Crotty. The ceiling to the chapel is made of cedar, as is the ceiling in the nave. The altar in the Warriors' Chapel is made from Australian marble, with carved arches and piers. The reredos above this altar is made from 14 terracotta panels designed by George Tinworth and made at Dalton Potteries in England, installed in 1924. The panels depict the final events in the life of Jesus. The steps to the altar and the platform on which it rests are made symbolically in red, white and black marble, red representing love and martyrdom, white representing purity and innocence, black symbolising sickness, death and mourning. The stone arches above the altar include carved thorn and vine leaves, symbolic of growth and regeneration. The chapel includes a life-size effigy of Alfred, the son of Lord Foster, former Governor-General of Australia. Alfred died in World War I. His effigy was dedicated in April 1928 and is a replica of the one in All Hallows Church near the Tower of London. The plain wooden cross in a glass case on the west wall of the chapel is a grave marker from the burial site of an unknown soldier in France from World War I. It was presented to Dean Crotty in 1926 by the then Prince of Wales, who later became King Edward VIII. The Changi rushlight, a small lamp placed in the chapel, was used in Changi Prison, Singapore between 1942 and 1945 and is one of 3 that survived the war. This rushlight was given to Christ Church Cathedral for safekeeping in memory of the Australians who did not return. There are 72 stained glass windows in the cathedral, most of them made in London. The largest is the rose window in the western wall, 6 metres in diameter, installed in 1928. It has 16 panels depicting saints, and the centre section illustrates the Annunciation. It's similar in style to those windows in the west wall of French Gothic cathedrals such as Notre Dame, Paris. The St Michael Chapel has 13 stained glass windows made in London. They depict saints and the struggle towards light against darkness and evil. The small circular stained glass window in the north transept depicts Christ coming to judgment, carried by 4 angels. Designed by Sir Edward Burne-Jones, an English artist in the 19th century, it's a replica of a window in a church in Berkshire, England. Installed in 1907, it is one of only 2 windows in churches in Australia designed by Burne-Jones. The other is in a chapel on Norfolk Island. The cathedral contains several significant items which have been placed into its care. These items are located in the south ambulatory, locked in a secure cabinet. They include the Victoria Cross and other medals awarded to Newcastle soldier Captain Clarence Jeffries, who died in the Battle of Passchendaele, Belgium, in World War I. His mother placed his medals into the perpetual care of the cathedral deans. Captain Jeffries went to school in the Newcastle suburb of Dudley, and in a unique coincidence, one of his school friends, William Curry, also won a Victoria Cross. The Book of Gold, with a dove of peace on the cover, contains the names of those military personnel from the Hunter Valley who died in World War I. The cover of the book is made from gold and precious stones from the rings and jewellery donated by wives, widows and mothers of the men who died. The gold flagon in the cabinet was presented to the old Christ Church in 1860 by the sister of Bishop Tyrrell. Also in the cabinet is Tyrrell's pastoral staff and the seal of the first and only Bishop of Australia, William Grant Broughton. There are two historically significant flags in the care of Christ Church Cathedral. On the western wall of the south transept is the Gallipoli flag. It is from the 13th Australian Infantry Battalion, an army unit raised in Maitland. Lieutenant Colonel Granville Burnage was presented with the flag in 1914 by the Ulster Association of New South Wales, and it flew over battalion headquarters at Anzac Cove, Gallipoli, from the 25th of April to the 15th of December 1915, the entire campaign. No other flags from Gallipoli are known to have been returned to Australia. The flag was hung in the north transept for 30 years until it disintegrated, as was the custom at that time. However, the remnants were discovered and professionally restored in 2000-2001, arranged by the then Dean and a committee, and it was re-hallowed on Anzac Day in 2001. The Birdwood flag is from World War I and was presented to General William Birdwood at Ypres, Belgium. It flew over the headquarters of the 1st Anzac Corps in Belgium in 1917. Birdwood had commanded the Anzacs during Gallipoli in 1915. After the war, the General returned the flag to the Dean of the Cathedral for permanent display. It was on show from 1924 to the 1980s, when it also disintegrated. From remnants found in a box in the cathedral in 2014, it was professionally restored and re-hallowed on Anzac Day in 2017, 100 years after it was flown over Ypres. On Thursday, the 28th of December 1989, a 5.6 magnitude earthquake rocked Newcastle and its surrounding area. It caused the destruction of 300 buildings and damage to an estimated 50,000 others. Christ Church Cathedral was severely damaged, with parts of the structure visibly displaced and much cracking to the internal structure that was not visible. Extensive shear cracking occurred to the walls from the top of the nave arches and piers through to the top of the parapets. The stone crosses to the top of the walls were displaced and fell either to the ground or through lower roofs. The flying buttresses were fractured and displaced but did not disintegrate. The brick joints to the base of the parapets were fractured, which caused them to lean both inwards and outwards. The brick panels to the top of the flying buttresses were dislodged, but the majority remained in place, although the joints were fractured. The central tower structure, completed in 1979, had minimal damage. The cathedral was initially listed for demolition, but following high-level discussions and appeals, it was decided to restore the building. The repair work, carried out between 1995 and 1997, involved a team of architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, builders and stonemasons, and was managed by the Newcastle practice EJE Architecture. The repair methodology involved a similar system to that used to repair Windsor Castle, England, after the fire there in 1992. It meant drilling the brickwork horizontally and vertically and inserting reinforcement rods, which were then grouted up. There are almost 4 kilometres of this reinforcement in the cathedral walls, and it's an extremely strong structure now. The Restoration Walk is a brick path laid around the east, south and west sides of the cathedral. It records the names of those individuals and families who have been remembered by their friends and relatives. On a personal note, my own ancestors, William and Mary Eckford, who came to Newcastle in 1814, are commemorated in paving bricks on the south side of the cathedral. Just a brief mention of the cathedral cemetery. The cemetery was officially commenced in 1816 and closed in 1884. In 1966 it was acquired by Newcastle City Council for a park. At that time there were 258 monuments or headstones left. Council retained 84 of the headstones and the remainder were used in the park and at Blackbutt Reserve for paths and retaining walls. The Cathedral Park Conservation Management and Interpretation Plan indicates that there are over 3,300 bodies still buried there. Newcastle City Council is undertaking a series of improvements to the Cathedral Park to link it to the history of the cathedral and the city. Ongoing research and investigation of the cemetery may reveal further details and could be the subject of a future podcast. In conclusion, visitors are welcome to the cathedral for services, quiet contemplation in the chapels, conducted or self-guided tours, browsing the cathedral shop in the entry foyer, exploring the Restoration Walk or the remaining gravestones in the Cathedral Park. A tour of the Cathedral Tower provides spectacular views of the city, harbour and coastline up to Nelson Bay.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of Newcastle's Christ Church Cathedral, a building that stands not only as a testament to Gothic revival architecture, but as a monument to the city's faith, endurance and evolving identity. Whether it was convicts laying the first stones in 1816, soldiers remembered in the Warriors' Chapel, or community voices that fought to save it after the 1989 earthquake, this cathedral has always reflected the spirit of its people. If you enjoyed today's podcast, consider sharing it with a friend, or visit and explore the cathedral in person. You can find more information on the cathedral's website, www.newcastlecathedral.org.au. You've been listening to Newcastle Family History Society Podcasts.